Genesis is not a textbook. God inspired Moses to write Genesis to teach people who sometimes discount God's hand in all the earth, to teach people who so easily become so enamored with how great and how powerful they are that they forget about God's hand, and to teach all of us that all of the beauty, all of the order that we see in today's world came from God out of chaos. In the Jewish tradition, believers are called on to reread the book of Genesis each year during the fall and on into the beginning of winter. Even though Moses was Jewish, Christians and Muslims use the book of Genesis. In a modern world that tends to dehumanize those that are different or those we consider enemies, Genesis teaches us that we are all one human family and that we were made in God's divine image. If you look at Genesis 1, you see that the process of creation involved separating and joining things together. Repeatedly, the term separation occurs in this chapter. If you look at our lesson today, it starts with God creating light and separating the day from the night. Again, with mere words, God spoke and brought out of emptiness order. He didn't just create light. In the empty sky, he caused the light to cycle in ways that created a day, a night. It created seasons. He, in essence, demarcated time for man. In Genesis, even feeble human minds can see a God of order. He placed the light in the sky to light the earth. The light provided heat because he placed it far enough away that it would not burn life away from the earth, but close enough that it would provide the warmth human beings and animals would need. In this part of Genesis, the Bible describes the heavenly bodies, the sun, the moon, the stars. And while we know that the moon does not generate light in and of itself, it has no source of power, it does reflect about 3 to 12% of the sunlight that hits it. Again, we see here God declares his work good. Now this shows God's personal care for his creation and for man. The thrust of chapter 1 is that God is preparing the earth to make it habitable for man. The good establishes that what God had made was in a perfect state before he introduced man into the world. We see once again in this lesson that God spoke, and from nothing and disorder came something and order. This orderly universe cannot happen by chance, but only by the hand of an orderly God. In verses 20 through 24, the lesson teaches us that God created an ecosystem with ecological balance. Every species in the ecosystem each had a role in keeping the ecosystem running smoothly. For example, predators keep the population of mice under control. Insects pollinate flowers that God had already created, and worms decompose leaves and litter. All species are important in helping to keep the ecological balance. God created an orderly world that could sustain itself. To look at this world and not see the infinite intellect and design of God is to intentionally blind yourself to his omnipotent power. It was on this day that God commanded the fish and the fowls to be produced and made them so that they could reproduce themselves. And when on the 5th day he declared his creation good, he takes away our right to destroy animals we think are useless. You see, the wisdom and power of God should be admired as much in a spider as it is in an elephant. All have an important role in the ecological system that God created. Who are we to question God's wisdom. From his words came animals, both wild and domestic, who inhabited the earth, able to reproduce their own kind. And again, God declared his work good in preparation for his crowning creation, man. Modern man, out of greed and arrogance, has damaged God's ecological system. We question the purpose of some of God's creation, and we destroy the ecological balance that God created in making a perfect world. An orderly God designed a world that was able to sustain itself. Animals could reproduce themselves and be fruitful and multiply. Man, with our finite knowledge, cannot compare to God with infinite knowledge. And that is why Genesis has the lesson to tell us that we, as human beings, mere human beings, must submit ourselves and be subject to God. That's the lesson for this week. Have a great week. Bye.